perhaps it will be necessary to think about political reforms as well as economic reforms. You are hearing an echo of what must be going on as the Chinese begin to prepare for their party congress in 2012. How can you deal with the aspirations of people who have come from the countryside, from 19th century villages to the great cities of China and find that they have no rights? How can you deal with the growing desire of Chinese workers to organize themselves for better labor conditions and for higher wages? And how can you deal with the obvious desire of the Chinese people to be a part of the internet revolution and to freely talk among themselves and organize among themselves? Yes, even in places where governments are able to deliver prosperity, there remains a desire, particularly in those places, to find a way for expression and to be a part of those who are governed by their will and consent, not by diktat. So, if we say to the skeptics, yes, you cannot impose democracy, you impose tyranny. If we say there are no people anywhere in any corner of the earth who are not ready for democracy, and if we say that even those who deliver prosperity have to deal with this desire for self-governance, what is left? Well, the argument is left that democracy is not just about elections. And so perhaps we who advocate for democracy are on the wrong track when our first insistence is that the most important principle is the consent of the governed. And maybe you know another way to do it, but I only know one way to find the consent of the governed. That's to hold an election. Now, the skeptics would say, but what if the bad guys win in an election? And they will point to Hamas in 2006 and Hezbollah a couple of times in Lebanon's history. They will point to the fact that in the first elections in Iraq and in Kuwait, the extremists did rather well. But let me suggest that while the bad guys may indeed win in first elections, at least they have to go before the people and they have to make an argument about why they ought to govern. And increasingly, if that argument is, elect us, and we will impose Sharia law, and we will make your children suicide bombers, I would suggest to you that maybe that's not going to be a very successful electoral slogan. That indeed, the danger of the bad guys contesting in politics is far less than what happened throughout the Middle East. And that is as follows. For more than 60 years, while the United States was arguing for freedom in the Soviet bloc, for freedom in Asia, for freedom in Latin America, for freedom even in Africa, we were saying that what mattered in the Middle East was stability. We argued for stability at the expense of democracy, and we got neither. I remember going to Egypt in June of 2005 to give a speech at the American University in Cairo. And in that speech, I was going to say that the Egyptians need to lead the Arab Revolution toward freedom. In fact, the need for that had been identified not by the United States, but by a group of Arab intellectuals who talked about the freedom gap as one of the Middle East's biggest problems. And in talking to President Mubarak that morning, before delivering the speech. He seemed to say, indeed he did say, "You don't know the Arab people. They need a strong hand. And, oh, by the way, the only thing standing between them and the Muslim Brotherhood is me. It is either me, the authoritarian, or the Muslim Brotherhood." And the problem in the Middle East is that the authoritarian regimes then acted in a way that made that true. And so the decent political forces, the political forces that believed in a separation of mosque and state, the political forces that believed in tolerance and free speech, those forces, those people were hounded by the secret police. They were prevented from forming political parties, but politics continued. The extremists organized in the radical mosques and in the radical madrasas. And there is a reason that today in the Middle East, the strongest, most organized forces are the extremists. But in the long run, what the people of the Middle East have said is it's unacceptable for the public square to be silenced. Unfortunately, this has come late in the Middle East. Here, standing in the Czech Republic, it is very easy to recall a particular moment that, for me, says everything about the weakness and, indeed, the instability of authoritarianism. It comes from a moment in Bucharest where the dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, went into a square with 250,000 Romanians. And he began to exhort them about what he had done for Romania. This with revolutions in Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Poland and East Germany. And he was quite certain that he had done enough to keep his people from revolting. And as he was speaking in this square in Bucharest, one old lady yelled "liar," and then 10 people, and then 100 people, and then 1,000 people, and then 100,000 people are yelling "liar." And now Ceausescu realizes that he has a problem. And he turns to run, but the young military officer who was supposed to deliver him to freedom delivered him instead to the revolution. And he and his wife, Yelena, were executed. You see, the Ceausescu moment is that moment when all that separates the authoritarian from his people, fear, breaks down. An old lady yells "liar." A policeman refuses to fire. A soldier turns the tank turret away from the crowd. And all of a sudden, all that authoritarian has had to keep his people oppressed is gone. And all that is left between the authoritarian and his people is anger. And anger is a terrible way to make political reform. And so we are about to go through a very, very difficult period in the Middle East, because the reforms have come late. And now, in the streets of Cairo and in Tunis, in the streets of Damascus, and soon in the streets of Tehran, there will be only anger. And so what is our responsibility as people who are not skeptical about the practicality and the realism of democracy? It is our responsibility, first and foremost, not to be neutral about which system of governance is legitimate. Only democracy is legitimate. Secondly, it is our responsibility to believe that people who are seeking their freedom are right and that they will succeed. This is no time for skepticism about whether in the Middle East the people are ready for democracy. Third, we have to mobilize every tool that we have to help the people of the Middle East towards stable transitions. That means working with civil society, and in places like Egypt and Tunisia, there are strong civil societies. It means university exchanges. It means working with the professional military in those countries. And perhaps most importantly, it means helping these young democratic forces to find an argument about why they will be better for the material lives of their people. You see, the truth is that young democracies will not last very long if they are not able to deliver social justice and prosperity for their people. The hardest times for me as Secretary of State were sometimes to go to struggling young democracies and to see the great gaps in wealth, the tremendous poverty, and to think, how can this young democracy survive? And to worry that in an electoral system, the next guy with a good-sounding populist message is probably going to sweep that young democracy from power. And so foreign assistance, trade policy, all now need to focus on what can be done to improve the prospects of young democracies to deliver for their people. But the one thing that we must do is we must recognize that there is no reason for nostalgia for the past. What may have seemed like stability in the Middle East was not. Today we see that. What some thought was stability in Eastern and Central Europe was not. We now know that. And so as we move forward, as friends of democracy, as believers in democracy, we need to take on the skeptics, and we need to ask them the following question: do you have a better idea? Because the idea that authoritarians can somehow continue to rule deep into the 21st century is really the one that is not practical, not realistic, and ultimately, as Ronald Reagan knew, not right. Thank you very much.